Okay. Hi, hello, and very warm welcome to all of you for the third episode of For the Love of Email Thursdays webinar series. I'm Chaitanya Chinta, Global Head of Email Business at Netcore. Netcore is a MarTech company which is doing a lot of stuff around emails, and we've been pioneering on interactive email or AMP for emails for quite some time. And this is a series where we particularly talk about AMP for email. We have done 2 episodes so far. If you've missed out, please do look for the 2 episodes before. In the previous episodes, we gave a high-level overview of what AMP for email can do for you and maybe some of the use cases that you can probably implement. But some of the feedback that we have got from the last 2 episodes is that we've been touching on the use cases, business use cases, but I think the technical aspect of it has been sort of left out. We thought that it's important for us to cover that piece. Because I think developing a normal email versus an AMP email is slightly different. So that's where we thought we bring a specialist in for you, for all of you, to make sure you get a gist of what it is like developing AMP emails, right? So without further delay, let me introduce our honored guest today, Jay Oram. Jay Oram is from Action Rocket. He heads the development for Action Rocket, and Action Rocket is a boutique team of passionate marketers, coders, designers, copywriters, and their just goal to supercharge your marketing campaigns, right? So Jay has had many experiences. I mean, overall his career. But I'll probably not steal the thunder from Jay, and I'll let him introduce himself on the today. Jay, very warm welcome and very good afternoon to you. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, I guess I could briefly go over myself. I don't want to talk too much, but yeah. So I started developing email about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, specifically developing email. And yeah, as soon as I started, there was a talk about AMP coming out, but it wasn't quite there yet. And then shortly after it came out, and yeah, I got involved right from the very beginning, part of the AMP working group. We sent one of the first commercial AMP emails with a client when it was very early on. And yeah, we've just been kind of building, as well as my day-to-day is building whole design systems with HTML, email, and CSS. We also do bespoke AMP emails as well. So yeah, that's what I tend to do, build all those. And I've got a team now that build them as well.
Amazing. So Jay, you've been there from with AMP development team for since the beginning almost, right? How do you see the evolution happening from, let's say, 2018 to 2023 roughly? How do you see the evolution happening?
Well, the first off, when it got started, I don't think they quite understood exactly what they were doing. They kind of wanted to bring the power of AMP to email, and decided on some components that could work, discussed it, brought it out to the community, started testing and see what would happen. And then through the working group and also through just developer feedback, more components have been added, more support for CSS has been added once people have started feeding back. And I think that continuous feedback cycle meant that it keeps growing. So that's something that we've really enjoyed, being able to see how more attributes, more components, more things like that can be supported throughout. And I think that will continue to go through 23. And even if you look at like the open source kind of side of it, with the GitHub discussions that are going on about what's happening and what people are trying to do, there's still people working on it and thinking about what is possible and what isn't possible in AMP. So that's definitely something I'm enjoying seeing. But also from 2018, when nobody could send AMP emails, but you could build them. And then now coming to 2023, when most ESPs, well, they all kind of support it. They don't all support it very well, but they all kind of let you send some version of AMP email. So that's the exciting part. It's becoming much wider adoption. I think one of the biggest jumps we saw was possibly last year or the year before, when Salesforce Marketing Cloud said they were going to support AMP for email. So when that happened, obviously the market grew huge after that. So then the development and everything to do with AMP for email started to grow much more, and more people started to talk about it since they could actually send it. So yeah, that's a really good bit.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So even on this part of the world, right, on the Eastern Hemisphere, also we've seen a bump in the overall interest in AMP in the last maybe 12 months, roughly 12 months, roughly. I think we've seen a very huge spike in the interest levels. So much so that from basic support, I think we went from basic support to developing an AMP email editor where you can probably start building some of the AMP emails within the product itself. I think there's a wonderful adoption curve that's happening right now. I think we've passed through that initial phase of early adopters, and then now it's probably moving to the masses. But it's also interesting to note from you that the features are also sort of increasingly available with AMP based on the user feedback and the feedback that AMP team is getting, right? So one of the common questions that we typically get from the brands or the marketers who are just designing the emails, right? The technical expertise that is required is widely different from what you do for a regular HTML email, right? How much of a learning curve is that according to you? Like, what do you see as a difference?
At the very beginning, when you're starting to look at the basic building blocks of putting it together, there's not too much of a learning curve. So one of the simplest components that everyone's going to have to use is going from just an image element to an AMP image element. So when you've got to learn what a layout does, you could do different sizes, how you could add classes and bits and pieces to that, to how it would behave. That isn't too much of a jump from what HTML does to what the AMP does version, for example. And if you're used to a framework like MJML or something like that, a lot of the attributes are very similar and the way it's kind of laid out. So that first jump to kind of transfer what you already do in HTML to an AMP email, I don't think is much of a learning curve at all. And then even when you get into something more complex, like say the carousel component or something like that, the way that it's set out and the way that the documentation is, it's very similar layout to a HTML element. So there's not too much of a change. Then the real part that is the big difference is just adding the next step, which is like AMP bind or AMP mustache, where you're starting to get into using JavaScript-like language, which a lot of HTML and CSS developers wouldn't have had much experience with. So that is the I think you can get a really long way into AMP email development just by using what you already know and just reading the documentation, and you will automatically open up loads more interactivity and loads more options before you even start looking at the more complex parts. So I think everyone who has just a normal HTML email at the moment and wants to create an AMP one, they're going to get into it quite easy, and they're going to find the ways to add to their user experience straight away. And then, I don't think, I personally, because I came from, I literally started doing only HTML and CSS and very basic understanding of JavaScript, because beforehand I was using drag and drop editors for everything. When I got frustrated with drag and drop editors, that's when I started to look at the code. So I've never been a full stack developer with JavaScript and all that kind of stuff. So that only came as I learned going through even the kind of, when you're in an ESP and you've got to set up if this, do that for a specific segment, that is a very simplified kind of templating language. And that all transferred into the AMP mustache bind quite easily, I think. So I think if you've got the basics and you can do a HTML CSS email, you can definitely get into an AMP email, and there's enough documentation and more tutorials and like things coming out that can point you down the direction of finding out the other parts. So although it seems like a big jump, I think if you take it incrementally and just do little steps along the way, you will find very quickly you go from basic to everything quite quickly.
Yeah, that's a good advice. I think we can start with, let's say, something which is just incremental from current HTML to AMP use cases, and then maybe as you evolve in your learning curve, then you go to more complex use cases. That's really good. So in your let's say maybe 4 to 5 years of experience with AMP emails, what is the most interesting use case that you would have worked on?
Most interesting. There's probably a couple actually. Yeah, what did we do? There's so many. I'm just trying to think of the best ones. So we brought in things like the preference center. We brought that into email. So instead, everyone tends to have a preference center now. So that kind of thing. But we brought it in for like a big brand that had lots of different channels and opportunities and lots of different genres and things like that. So bringing all of that into the email was it was a good challenge to kind of bring it in. But then also the results were huge because everyone knew that the difficulty with email is that you have to click on something to go to a web page to do something,
Right.
and that extra step is almost like is something that is hard, and we know that that's a barrier for people and they don't want to do it. So by containing something into the email, that's really helped. Another one was we brought in like live scores for events, so a sporting event, something like the Cricket World Cup, or we did like NFL, the whole season of NFL, bringing in the live results into an email so that whenever you opened it, you got to see the latest results. All of those were like, yeah, I mean, because all of the data was already there, and we had the public feeds are there, and the companies we were working on were showing it or doing something like that. So to bring that information in, all of a sudden, AMP gave you the opportunity to bring all that information in. And yeah, it was just convenience. And I think it's nice to see, yeah, it's almost exciting from going from that HTML static email that you open and nothing changes, or like you've tried to use live images and things like that, but then going almost to this completely different mindset of we can bring everything in, just do whatever you want, and then like amazing, it just happens all at once. So yeah, it's definitely
you can actually get almost like a website inside in the email
yeah
itself.
like a little mini app kind of thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. And one point that I'd probably conquer there is that whenever we try to, short circuit the customer journey, or what you rightly said, right? So user does not want to click on playing, go on to website, do something else. So bring that action within the email, and we've seen tremendous results too. I think that's one thing that we have seen on ground working with multiple brands out here. I think we have seen that delivering phenomenal results. So while this is all the good about the emails, but on the other hand, let's say there's this thing about Apple not supporting AMP for emails. I mean, I don't think they intend to support it anytime in the future. At least I don't see any conversation that's happening on the Apple side. Right. What are your thoughts on it? What have you seen from in your side of the world? What have you seen that, how does the market respond to it? And then,
we because we've come from the HTML CSS side, we were trying to bring those experiences into Apple Mail anyway. So like I said before, we couldn't do the live data, we couldn't pull in things, and we had to use weird kind of hacky ways around it, where we had to use like a live image that was updated in the background. And then other issues like the mail privacy protection kind of stopped that. So then we started doing different things. So we could kind of create a really nice user experience within Apple Mail because it supported a lot of CSS features that weren't supported in other email clients. So we could add sliders, we could add click to reveals, we could do accordions, like some of the things that the AMP components added to a lot of other email clients, we could kind of already do in Apple, but it wasn't as accessible, or the way that it was built was more complicated and wasn't really open to lots of people. So yeah, I think we can kind of, even though Apple doesn't support it, we can create the experience as close as possible in Apple as we can in AMP anyway, and give the users a very similar experience. And then only in some cases, like you said, like with a form or a feedback or something like that, if you may have to click from Apple to a website, but you can do all of that in the email for AMP. So yeah, it's I would love all the email clients to support everything, and that would make my job a whole lot easier as well. But
that's true.
it is nice that we have like the differences. There's also, because there's the email marketing consortium is like a new open community group, which is trying to get just all of the normal email clients who support HTML CSS to support the same stuff. And then AMP for email is trying to get that kind of group of code components to be supported across markets as well. So I think between the two of them, hopefully something will come together and we'll get more support. But Apple Mail can't do that live image stuff, and that's the main, or the live data stuff, sorry. So that's the main drawback, I think, of that. But if it's all, I always say when you're doing interactive stuff that you need to know your audience, and we've seen that a lot of our brands and a lot of our clients, Apple was a large part, but Gmail has always been a large part as well. So when you is always looking at it and going, well, if 80% of my audience is in Gmail and I've got 10-15% in Apple and then the rest is something else, then it's worth investing in that AMP to get the experience there. And then when that's up and running and you know what's working, maybe you can transfer that to Apple. So yeah, I think there's lots of things to think about. And some audiences are massively Apple and not really Gmail. So then maybe you would rethink your way that you work it out or something like that. And also keep an eye on the AMP website, which has got all of the new clients that are coming along, because they've added some in the last kind of year and 18 months or so. So I'm sure that there's going to be more email clients that will come on board. So yeah, it may be pressure. Maybe Apple Mail will bow to the pressure one day. You never know. Everyone else will be using it, and Apple Mail will be the holdout.
No, they said yes to be me, and I'm assuming at some point in the future they'll say yes to Ample
exactly.
also, right? Hopefully. But what you said is right. Like, if your majority of the user base is Gmail, and which is like, at least on our side of the world, it's more like 80+% of your user base is Gmail. In some cases, it's about 90, 95. So definitely investing in that definitely makes sense in that scenario. So coming back to use cases, what would be your most complex use case that you would have implemented? Like, this is the most tedious, complex one that you would have
insane
tried.
thing, yeah.
Yeah, insane level of complexity.
We've worked with bringing in loads of information from an app, and that's probably the most difficult. Was things like it's, I guess, from when you start, like I keep mentioning, but you go back to that HTML and CSS, you never talk to the web team, you never talk to your data team you think about pulling in data to your ESP maybe, and you'll maybe grab some personalization parts, but you don't have that conversation. And AMP allowed us with this specific app to talk to the whole app team, and talk about what would be available, how they could set up webhooks, how we could set up JSON data that's coming out, how we could get live feeds, and pretty much everything that was available in the app, apart from the actual app experience, and we could bring into the email. So if you wanted to set your preferences, if you wanted to do your settings, if you wanted to record that you had done something instead of opening the app, you could get an email that says, oh, you haven't done this today, did you mean to? And you can do it right there in the email and be done with it. And like almost like a watch this, like, have you read your latest article, or have you visited and seen this latest video? All those things that you would normally like have to get that little red dot on your app, and then you have to go to it and click on it. We managed to bring a lot of that experience into the email so that it built engagement. And that was the one that caused lots of headaches, that were like, oh, we need access to this data, and oh, when we've got this data and we've updated it in the email, we've then got to send it back to the app so that the app can also know what's going on. And then we want a seamless experience between like if you open the email and do something and then you go straight to the app, we need to make sure that the app's doing what you've said is happening in the email. And that is the kind of hardest one that we've worked on, but then also the most rewarding. Once it's all set up and done, you kind of, obviously because we were working with the app, we had the app downloaded and all of us got really involved with it. And then we started to get the emails ourselves as users and then start to see how it all works. And yeah, although there was a lot of work going into it, and there's still continuing work, it's going to continue for a long time, I imagine, with updates and everything like that. But yeah, that was the most insane, tedious part. But yeah, I think it has to be the right team. And as an agency, we don't always get that connection with the client to be able to work on something that huge. And so when that opportunity came along, that was something we like grabbed onto. So yeah, you need, as an AMP email developer, you're not in your own little box where you do emails and then never talk to anyone else. You're part of the whole team. So yeah, that's really nice.
Oh, wow. Imagine, right? I mean, getting an entire app into email is like insane. But that also reminds me, right? So when we talk to most of the app companies, at least this has been my experience, right? So when we talk to one of the topmost problems that they face is the early churn. Like, people install apps, use it for once or twice, and then delete and then move on, right? Brand might still have email address as a handle, but I don't think there's there's a nudge to get the user back interacting with the application itself, and that percentages are insane, right? From 60% to 80% in some cases. Those numbers are insane. Churn numbers are insane. But imagine if we can get the app into the email, or at least let's say even if it's 50% of the app in the email, right? I mean, email can be one property that can be reached out anytime, every day. But still, user can interact with it as good as with your app. I mean,
it's finding that part. I think it's that part of the app that is the reason why people went to that app in the first place. So this one was like a daily thing that you had to do, or you set yourself a goal to try and do something every day. And then, like you said, they had that same experience where people did it. They did it for like a week, 2 weeks, and then it starts to drop off. But having that email come in and have the ability to quickly go, oh yeah, I wanted to do that, do it in the email quickly, and then forget about it. Then they realize, they build up in their head that, I do want to see that in the app. I do want to keep the app. And then that just increased it. So yeah, it was definitely, it's worthwhile. Definitely.
Amazing. So let's say a bit futuristic, like 2023 has begun, right? How do you see AMP for email shaping up, and with respect to adoption, with respect to features, how do you see this coming along in 2023?
I think that the ecosystem around AMP is growing, and that is what's going to build AMP. So you've got things like, there's better developer tools, there's better drag and drop options out there for you to get started using AMP, and then there's tools out there that have that bring more things into your developer experience, and more extensions to developing, like in IDEs and things like that. So all of those things are going to make 2023 a big year of like people that are building AMP emails but maybe find some parts of it hard, or they need help with other parts, or some of it, like you said, some things are tedious and difficult to do because you've got to switch between different parts and things like that. But I think the tools that are coming out now are making everything so much easier that is going to be a big jump in like how things are changing. And then I think, like, because there's so many no code tools that have come in, a lot of email marketers are gonna start on AMP, and they're going to use the no code tools to get started, and then they're going to realize the power of it, and then they're going to talk to developers to develop that extra bit, and that's really cool.
Yeah, amazing. So 2023 is going to be, I think, the threshold to get started. I mean, it's coming lower and lower, so that so any marketer could technically start off with their first AMP emails, first tranche of AMP emails, and then we can probably take the interesting use cases with the developers at a later point of time. Very nice. So for our marketers, coders who are watching this webinar, any advice, any final advice that you would want to give in terms of how do you get started? How do you scale? From your experience.
Just code something. So I was for a long time someone that got stuck into, like, they call it like tutorial hell, where you're doing a tutorial and then you get halfway through and you're like, oh, this is not, like, I don't want to do this, but the tutorial is teaching me something, so I should keep doing it. I've gone away from that now, and I just think of an idea and I'm like, oh, how can I do that in AMP? And then I just do it. So you just, although it sounds like I'm saying it's easy and like, oh yeah, I'll just come up with an idea and just do it. But you think of an idea and then you think, oh, maybe I can use that thing that I've not used in AMP before. So let's see if I can do it. And because it's not like a deadline for a client, or there's no pressure, and you can just do it because you're learning, I find that's the best way to do it. So maybe if you see someone else's AMP email, try and recreate it. If you see an interactive email that isn't AMP, try and create it in AMP, something like that. And then another thing is to like join in with all of the other people that are trying to learn, because there's so many there now, like you said, like it's becoming a big thing, and there's definitely a groundswell of people doing things. So join in with like the AMP has its own Slack group, and one of the channels is AMP for email, so you can go in there and talk to them. The Email Geek Slack group, you could join that, and there's people in there trying to learn. There's a lot of people in there that are starting out with AMP, trying to learn how these things work and how that stuff comes together. Or like on Twitter, there's brands talking about it and offering webinars like this or tutorials and things. So being part of that almost makes you want to try and do something, and then the more you like get encouraged and you're like, yeah, I really want to do this, then you go and build stuff. And that's always I find I need the motivation, and if I'm building something I want to build and something that I think is going to be cool, then I'll put more effort into it. And then that I think everyone should do that. If you don't enjoy it and you don't want to do it, then I can't help you. But if you want to learn and you're like, I could do this, then go for it.
Absolutely. That's a really useful advice for all the developers out here. With that, Jay, I'd like to really thank you for joining us today for this amazing discussion. Do follow Jay on his Twitter. I think you're on Twitter. You're on Email Geeks. At least I know these two social networks. Of course, LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Twitter, it's emailj_. Find me on Email Geek Slack. They're probably I'm in Email Geek Slack every day, trying to help as many people as I can and getting help. But Twitter is definitely the place where I follow all of the different AMP stuff going on. So
Amazing. So if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, you can reach out to us at hello@networkcloud.com. And if you want to know about Netcore's email AMP offerings, you can go to networkcloud.com/AMP. You would be able to see a lot of things that we're doing on email, AMP for email. And with that, I bid goodbye for this webinar, and have a nice day, everyone. Thank you. I think